To understand why the most powerful naval force in history was destroyed in just 5 minutes, we must look away from the American pilots. We must look instead at the men they defeated. We must look at the disease that was rotting the Imperial Japanese Navy from the inside out. It is late May, 1942. The location is the battleship Yamato, anchored in Hiroshima Bay. This is the heart of the combined fleet. For 6 months, they have swept across the Pacific, crushing the British, the Dutch, and the Americans with terrifying efficiency. They are not just confident, they are intoxicated. In the high command, they had a name for this psychological condition. They called it senshobio, the victory disease. It is a belief that you are invincible. It is the delusion that the enemy is not just weak, but incompetent. And it was here, in the wardroom of the Yamato, weeks before the first shot was fired, that the Battle of Midway was actually lost. The officers gathered for the final war games. These were tabletop simulations designed to test the plan for the invasion. The plan itself was a masterpiece of complexity, created by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. It involved scattering forces across thousands of miles of ocean to lure the American carriers into a trap. During the simulation, the officer playing the American commander launched a surprise flank attack. The dice were rolled. The calculation was made. The result was catastrophic for Japan. The referees ruled that 2 of their precious aircraft carriers were sunk and a third was damaged. The room went silent. This was not supposed to happen. But instead of changing the plan to address this weakness, the presiding officer, Rear Admiral Matome Ugaki, stepped in. He refused to accept the result. He reached down, picked up the sunken carrier marker from the table, and placed it back on the map. He overruled the umpire. He declared that the Americans could not possibly pull off such a maneuver. In the fantasy world of the Japanese staff, the carriers were resurrected. The plan was perfect because they decided it had to be perfect. They erased the possibility of defeat, believing that their will alone could bend reality. This arrogance blinded them to the physical facts of the war. While American intelligence officers were burning the midnight oil piecing together the Japanese codes, the Japanese intelligence was failing spectacularly. They had planned a vital reconnaissance mission called Operation K. 2 massive flying boats were supposed to fly over Pearl Harbor to confirm the location of the American fleet. It was the only way to know if the trap would work. But when the Japanese submarine arrived at the refueling point at French frigate Shoals, they found a surprise. The Americans were already there. 2 United States Navy ships were anchored in the lagoon. The Japanese submarine could not surface. The planes could not land. The mission was scrubbed. A prudent commander would have panicked. Without this reconnaissance, Admiral Nagumo, the commander of the carrier strike force, was flying blind. He had no idea where the American ships were, but the victory disease had taken hold. The staff assumed the Americans were still sleeping in Pearl Harbor. They did not try to find another way to check. They simply assumed the best-case scenario was the only scenario. On May 27th, the fleet set sail. It was the largest assembly of naval power the Pacific had ever seen. 4 heavy carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Behind them, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. They sailed into the rain and mist, maintaining strict radio silence to avoid detection. +2. But silence works both ways. By forbidding radio traffic, the scattered parts of the Japanese fleet could not talk to each other. If one part of the force discovered a problem, They could not warn the others. They were isolated in their own vastness. Admiral Nagumo stood on the bridge of the Akagi. He looked out at his flight decks, packed with the best pilots on Earth. These men were veterans of Pearl Harbor. They had thousands of hours of flight time. They were the samurai of the sky. Nagumo believed, just as the staff on the Yamato believed, that if they could just force the Americans into a fight, Japanese skill and spirit would crush them. He did not know that the Americans were not in Pearl Harbor. He did not know that his codes had been broken. He did not know that the resurrected carriers from the war game were sailing into a trap that had been set specifically for them. As the massive bow of the Akagi cut through the dark waves of the Pacific, the countdown had already begun. The Japanese Imperial Navy was steaming confidently toward the coordinates of its own extinction. It is 7:15 in the morning on June 4th. On the bridge of the Akagi, the mood is calm. The first wave of aircraft has just finished attacking Midway Island. The reports are good. The American base has been damaged. Admiral Nagumo is preparing to launch a second wave to finish the job. His aircraft are currently in the hangars below, being armed with high explosive bombs designed to destroy land targets. Then the radio operator hands him a slip of paper that changes history. A reconnaissance plane from the cruiser Tone, known as Scout Number 4, has spotted something. The message is vague. It reports 10 enemy ships to the northeast. It does not mention aircraft carriers. Nagumo freezes. If there are no carriers, these ships are not a threat. But if there is a carrier, his fleet is in mortal danger. This is the moment the victory disease becomes fatal. A prudent commander would have launched his reserve aircraft immediately to attack the ships, even with the wrong weapons. A bomb is still a bomb. But Nagumo hesitates. He waits for confirmation. For 15 agonizing minutes, the Japanese fleet sails on, doing nothing. Finally, the scout reports back. It looks like a carrier. Panic sweeps the bridge. Nagumo realizes he has the wrong weapons loaded. He cannot send planes with land bombs to attack a moving steel warship. They might bounce off or do minimal damage. He makes the decision that will doom the Empire. He orders a complete rearmament. Down in the enclosed hangars of the Akagi and Kaga, hell breaks loose. The order comes down. Switch from land bombs to torpedoes. To understand the horror of what happens next, you must understand the physical reality of a Japanese aircraft carrier. These are not open spaces like American ships. The hangars are enclosed steel boxes, 2 decks deep, with no ventilation. The air is thick with the fumes of high-octane aviation fuel. Hundreds of mechanics scramble to obey the impossible order. They have to physically remove 800-kilogram bombs from the bellies of the Kate bombers. These weapons are heavy and unwieldy. According to strict naval regulations, the removed bombs must be immediately lowered onto carts, taken to the elevator, and returned to the safety of the reinforced magazine deep in the bowels of the ship. But there is no time. The Americans are coming. The officers scream at the mechanics to hurry. In the chaos, the regulations are ignored. Instead of returning the bombs to the magazine, the exhausted crews simply push them to the side of the hangar. They line them up against the bulkheads. They leave them sitting on the floor. Then the order changes again. Nagumo dithers. He needs to launch fighters to defend the fleet, then launch bombers to attack. The confusion is total. Torpedoes are brought up. Bombs are pushed aside. By 7:45, The hangars of the Japanese carriers are no longer military workspaces. They are warehouses of unsecured explosives. Dozens of fully fueled aircraft are packed wingtip to wingtip, and scattered all around them, rolling on the steel floor, are piles of high explosive bombs and torpedoes. There is no safety gear. There is no fire suppression active. Nagumo believes he is preparing a master stroke. He believes he is swapping weapons to deliver a perfect crushing blow to the American arrogance. He does not realize that he has just spent the last 30 minutes turning his own flagships into massive, floating bombs. The fuse is set. All it will take is a single spark. And on the horizon, the first desperate American planes are already appearing. At 9:20 in the morning, the first American planes appear on the horizon. They are the TBD Devastators of Torpedo Squadron 8. To the Japanese pilots circling high above in their Mitsubishi Zeros, these American planes look pathetic. They are slow, obsolete, and flying low against the water. They look like easy prey, and they are. This is the moment where the Japanese defensive system fails, not because it is weak, but because it is too aggressive. The Japanese Combat Air Patrol does not operate like a modern Air Force. They lack ship-to-air radar guidance. There is no central controller telling specific squadrons to stay high while others engage low. Instead, they rely on visual spotting and aggressive spirit. When the American torpedo bombers are spotted skimming the waves, the Japanese fighter pilots succumb to a pack mentality. It is a feeding frenzy. Dozens of Zeros peel out of their high-altitude formations and dive toward the sea. They are eager to claim a kill. They are eager to protect the carriers from the torpedoes. The slaughter is absolute. The Japanese Zeros, faster and more agile, tear into the American formation. One by one, the Devastators catch fire and cartwheel into the ocean. The Japanese anti-aircraft gunners on the decks cheer as they watch the black smoke rise from the water. They believe they are witnessing a great victory. They have wiped out an entire American squadron without a single torpedo hitting a Japanese ship. Then a second wave of American torpedo planes arrives, then a third. The Japanese fighters, now flying just feet above the ocean, turn to engage this new threat. They are busy, they are victorious, they are expending their ammunition and fuel destroying these low-level attackers. The air is filled with tracers and smoke. The noise is deafening, but in this noise, they miss the silence, because every single Japanese fighter has dived down to the deck to join the fight. The sky above the fleet is now completely empty. The high-altitude patrol sector is abandoned. There is no one watching the clouds. There is no one left to intercept a high-level attack. The Americans have unknowingly executed a perfect tactical distraction. By sacrificing their torpedo crews in a suicidal low-level run, they have pulled the entire Japanese defensive shield down to sea level. The lid over the Kido Butai has been removed. On the bridge of the Akagi, the officers are relieved. The attacks have been repelled. The evasive maneuvers have worked. The carriers are turning back into the wind to launch their own counterstrike. The flight decks are busy. The hangars are still full of unsecured bombs. The refueling hoses are out. It is 10:22. The Japanese fleet feels invincible again. The gunners lower their barrels, their eyes fixed on the burning wreckage in the water. Nobody looks up, and directly overhead, at 19,000 feet, unseen and unopposed, the tip of the spear is already rolling into its dive. It is 10:22 in the morning. For the last hour, the Japanese carriers have been surviving on luck. Now, the bill has come due. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey pushes the nose of his dauntless dive bomber forward. Behind him, 30 more American planes follow. They are diving from 19,000 feet. The angle is steep, almost 70 degrees. The speed builds to 250 miles per hour. The wind screams against the dive brakes. To the Japanese sailors on the deck of the Kaga, the sound comes first, a high-pitched whine that rises to a terrifying shriek. When they finally look up, it is too late. The sky is raining death. The first bombs miss, exploding in the water, but the fourth bomb does not miss. It smashes through the flight deck near the rear elevator. A moment later, more bombs strike the forward and middle sections. This is where the physics of the disaster takes over. If these bombs had hit an American carrier, the damage might have been survivable. American hangars were often open-sided, allowing the force of an explosion to vent harmlessly into the sea. But the Kaga and Akagi are built differently. Their hangars are fully enclosed steel boxes designed to protect the aircraft from the elements. When the American bombs penetrate the flight deck and detonate inside the hangar, the blast wave has nowhere to go. The ship becomes a massive pressure cooker. The explosion rebounds off the steel walls, amplifying the force. And then the second disaster happens. The trap set by Admiral Nagumo's hesitation snaps shut. The hangar is crowded with fully fueled aircraft. But worse, it is littered with the high explosive ordnance that was left on the floor during the frantic rearmament 40 minutes ago. The American bombs act as a detonator for the Japanese fleet's own weapons. The result is not just a fire. It is an instant, catastrophic chain reaction. The loose torpedoes explode. The stacked bombs detonate. The aviation fuel lines rupture, spraying burning gasoline over the screaming mechanics. The flight deck, made of wood and steel, is ripped upward like cardboard. The forward elevator of the Kaga, a massive platform weighing tons, is blown completely out of the ship, spinning through the air like a leaf before crashing into the ocean. Hundreds of Japan's most elite pilots and technicians, men with years of irreplaceable experience, are vaporized in a split second. They never even had a chance to get to their planes. On the flagship Akagi, the devastation is surgically precise. Lieutenant Dick Best drops a single 1,000-pound bomb. It punches through the center of the deck and explodes in the upper hangar. The blast ignites the fueled torpedo bombers waiting to launch. The induced explosion is so violent it jams the ship's rudder and severs communication. Admiral Nagumo, the man who commanded the most powerful fleet in the world, is suddenly standing on a burning wreck, shouting orders that no one can hear. In just 6 minutes, 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, are transformed from pristine warships into drifting crematoriums. The invincible Kido Butai has not just been defeated. It has been gutted from the inside out by its own design flaws and its own indecision. The Battle of Midway is effectively over. The massacre has begun. The sun sets on June 4th, 1942. The silence over the Pacific Ocean is deafening. In the span of a single day, the Imperial Japanese Navy has lost 4 aircraft carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, and over 3,000 men. But the true magnitude of this defeat cannot be measured in tonnage or casualty lists. The true loss is something far more critical, something that Japan could never replace. The competitor might tell you that Japan lost because they ran out of ships. That is only half the truth. The real reason Japan lost the war on this day is that they lost their institutional memory. The pilots who died in the infernos of the Akagi and Kaga were not just soldiers. They were the elite. They were men with thousands of hours of flight time, men who had been training since the 1930s. Japan viewed its pilots like artisans, crafting them to perfection over years. But they had no system to replace them. When those bombs hit the enclosed hangars, they did not just destroy steel. They incinerated the mentorship of an entire generation. The Japanese Navy spent years creating a sword of diamond-hard sharpness, but diamond is brittle. Strike it once in the wrong spot, and it shatters. The Americans, by contrast, were building a hammer. It was heavy, blunt, and resilient. While Japan was mourning the loss of 4 carriers, American shipyards were already laying the keels for 24 new Essex-class carriers. The United States could afford to make mistakes. Japan had built a military doctrine where one mistake meant extinction. The aftermath of the battle reveals the terrifying nature of the Japanese regime. Unlike the Americans, who learned from their losses, the Japanese leadership chose to hide them. When the survivors of the Midway fleet returned to Japan, they were not treated as heroes. They were treated as a contagion. The wounded sailors were isolated in secret hospital wards, forbidden from contacting their families, forbidden from speaking to anyone. The government was so terrified of the truth that they continued to tell the public that Midway was a great victory. They buried the reality of the defeat just as they had buried the bodies of their airmen at sea. This denial ensured that the lessons of Midway were never learned. The Japanese Navy continued to build ships with poor damage control. They continued to neglect pilot safety. They continued to believe in the myth of their own invincibility until the very end. History often remembers the Battle of Midway as a miracle. They call it 5 minutes of luck. But looking closely at the engineering, the doctrine, and the decisions, there was no luck involved. The Americans won because their system was designed to survive chaos. The Japanese lost because their system required perfection in a world where perfection is impossible. Admiral Nagumo stood on the bridge of the Akagi and waited for a perfect situation that never came. And while he waited, the clock ran out. The burning hulks of the Kido Butai are not just monuments to a battle. They are warnings. They remind us that hubris, rigidity, and the refusal to admit error are far more dangerous than any enemy bomb. The war would drag on for 3 more bloody years, but the Empire of the Rising Sun did not die in 1945. It died right here, in these 5 fatal minutes, amidst the fire and the oil of a broken fleet. Most history books call Midway a miracle. We just proved it was a systemic failure. If you prefer uncomfortable truths over convenient myths, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps the algorithm find other critical thinkers. And tell me in the comments, do you see victory disease happening in any modern corporations or superpowers today? Let's debate.